So how do I transfer assets to my trust? My name is Andrew Ayers. I'm an estate planning and business law attorney with offices in Edina, Minnesota and New York City. And today we're going to look at one of the most common questions I get from my clients once we're finished with the estate planning process and we've created that trust. So when you've reached this point in the process, you've probably spent some time thinking about your trust and what kind of legacy you want it to leave for you and your family. And you've gone through the whole process, you've created the documents, made some revisions, now you've signed the document and you think, great, everything's done, I've done the heavy lifting, but there's still one important step left that we need to make sure happens, and that is we have to fund the trust if that is the purpose of the trust. Now there's going to be two kinds of trusts we deal with. Trusts that we're going to set up right now, usually called a living trust, or a trust that's going to be set up down the road in your will, which is called a testamentary trust. So we're not going to look at testamentary trusts today. That's not what this video is about. We're going to look at a living trust, one that we're setting up now and that we can move assets into. Because it's one of the most common problems I see when clients come to me 15 or 20 years later. They've created a trust, it's a living trust, but they never put any assets into it. And the question is, what do? We thought it was done back in the day. We signed the paperwork. We thought everything was good. What else did we have to do? As a general principle, when you create a trust, you often will create what's called a pour-over will with that trust. And what that will does is it takes any assets, anything you own at the time of your death, and automatically transfer it to your trust. So this is like a savings clause for you. So if you forget to ever transfer any assets to your trust, your will should be there to do that part of the process. But for many of my clients, we're setting up the trust to be used while they're still alive. There's some kind of benefit that we want to make sure we're getting out of that trust. That living trust needs to then be funded. So the first question you want to ask is, what kind of assets can I put into my trust? And really, any kind of asset that has a title on it can be put into a trust. Almost any kind of asset. So first of all, real estate. If you own a home, you own a cabin, you own a vacation home, you can move that into the trust. Financial accounts. Most of the financial accounts you will run into can be moved into the trust. We're going to talk in a minute about a few that can't be put into the trust, but for those we can use a beneficiary designation to then have the money go into the trust when you pass. Collectible vehicles, if you have a really fancy vehicle or a really special boat or some kind of big asset like that, there's going to be title to it, you can move that into your trust. And then, of course, if you have a business that you want to move into your trust, it's a great idea if you have an LLC or a sole proprietorship. You're running your business, you're a one-person shop. It's a good idea to have a trust be involved to make sure that that business is protected from your local probate court. So what kind of assets can't we put into a trust? For example, one, we can't put a retirement account into a trust. So your IRAs, your 401ks, those can't be owned by a trust. And the way we get around that is we create the trust as a beneficiary. So most of my clients will have their spouse be the primary beneficiary, and then the trust will be the secondary beneficiary. Another type of account that you can't put into the trust is an HSA account. So a health savings account can't be put into a trust, but again, if we work the beneficiary designations, we can have that trust be the beneficiary down the road. So we've looked at kind of what different assets there are, what can go in and what can go out. And the question is, I always get is, so how do I do it? So if we're looking at real estate, what we need to do is we need to update the deed. And we want to make sure that if you're updating the deed to your house or real property that has insurance on it, we've got to let the insurance company know as well. If we don't let the insurance company know, we've created a hole in our insurance coverage, and that hole can then mean that if something happens with the property and there's a lawsuit, your insurance may not protect you. So for real estate, we're going to look for the deed and we need to update it so that the trust owns it. Financial accounts is a little bit easier. What we do is we go to the financial institution. We usually show them what's called a certification of trust. It's a document that you signed when you signed your trust agreement. And you show them the certification of trust, and then they can update the ownership information on your bank account. If we're going to go to your businesses, what we need to do is go back into your corporate documents, and we need to update those corporate documents to reflect that your ownership interest is now being held by a trust. If you have a sole proprietorship, you may not actually have these documents yet, but it's a good idea if we're setting up a trust to make sure we have business documents in place that reflect that the trust is holding your ownership interest. And then if we have beneficiary designations on things like our retirement accounts, what we can do is make sure that those beneficiary designations, when they need to go to the trust, are properly worded. So if you look at page 1 of your trust, you're usually going to find a description of your trust, and there's a small paragraph that says, when we refer to the trust, here's the language. The John Smith Living Revocable Trust, dated June 1st, 2001, and the successors or trustees or assignees. There can be all kinds of language there, and we want to make sure we follow that when we're creating that title. So we've looked at what kind of assets go into the trust, what assets don't go into the trust. We've looked at how we do it for each of those assets, but you probably want to know, like, what are those next steps for me? So I can give you a simple 3-step plan that we can take on how you're going to update each asset. Step number 1, figure out the title to the asset. How do we document the title? How do we show somebody who owns it and find that document? Number 2, how do we change the title to the asset? So we know we've got a deed for our house. What do we have to do? What are those next steps to update that deed? And then number 3, confirm that the title was changed. So once you've gone through the process, we've figured out the title, we've changed it, we've filed it, make sure that you've confirmed that everything's been filed and you're all set. And then what you can do is take those confirmation documents and put them in your estate plan document folder, your holder, your wallet if you work with my company, whatever you use to hold your estate plan documents, put those confirmations of title change in with your trust so that there's no doubt that if something happens and we need to figure out what assets are in the trust, we have all the proper documents there. So it's pretty straightforward. When you've created a trust, we want to make sure that we fund it, but we want to also make sure we're following those steps so that it gets done and confirmed and finished. If you're not sure where to get started or you need some help, you can go to my website, 𝙃𝙀𝙍𝙀𝙀. There's a red legal strategy session button on the front page. If you click that, you're taken to my personal calendar. We can set up a 15 or 20-minute phone call. We call them a legal strategy session, and we can go through where you are in the process. If you've already created a trust, or maybe you're creating a new one, and you want to make sure that you're getting this step taken care of in the process. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, I'd love it if you can hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you again in future videos.